if you would find your way to two different passages of Scripture this morning. Find your way first to Philippians chapter 2, and then when you find your way there, turn back to Ecclesiastes 4. These are going to be the two foundational passages as we begin this new series of studies this morning as we approach the holiday season that I want to entitle Surviving the Holidays, Getting Together and Getting Along. Let me tell you why I felt led to preach this particular series of studies. By my count, I could be wrong, but by my count, we are like 18 days away from Thanksgiving. We are 49 days away from Christmas. We are 56 days away from New Year's Day. In other words, the holidays are here. Now, normally when you would think about the holidays, you would think that this would be the most festive, happy, joyful time of the year. You would think that this would be, as the old song says, the most wonderful time of the year. You would think that this would be the time when most people are happy and cheerful. That's the way that all the ads and the movies and the Hallmark specials would have you to believe, right? But for far too many people, this isn't the most wonderful time of the year. It is the most depressing and discouraging time of the year. And I think that there are several reasons for that. For a lot of folks, it's because of who's not there. I mean, I don't have time, and really it's not my intention in this particular series of studies to deal with this specifically. But for those who have lost a loved one in the past year, the holidays can be a sad and lonely time as you're reminded of that one that you loved and spent so many Thanksgivings and Christmases and New Year's together that they're noticeably absent. And so for some, it's because of who's not there. But for a lot of other folks, it's because of who is there. In other words, the holidays are discouraging and depressing and even divisive because of who shows up. You've got all these strained relationships that you put together in the pressure cooker of small dining rooms and cramped living rooms and company Thanksgiving dinners and Christmas parties. And if you're not careful, it can lead to an explosion of emotions and end up doing more damage and destruction as well. By the way, it should not be that way. How many of y'all know that? It should not be that way. Holidays should be fun and exciting and joyful. They should not be discouraging and depressing and even divisive. And I agree with David Costin when he said, relationships are the most important quality in the kingdom of heaven. Relationships are the most important quality in the kingdom of heaven. You say, well, why is that? Well, because your relationships will either pull you closer to God or they'll push you further away from God. They're either going to make you more like God or they're going to make you more like the devil. And you're either going to learn the valuable lessons of life as a result of your relationships, or you're going to be condemned to repeat them over and over and over and over again. The country preachers used to say something like this: you show me your friends and I'll show you the kind of person that you either are or you soon shall become. And I think you can even put your family in that mix as well. That's why I believe that one of the key factors that's going to determine the kind of life that you have here on earth, and even where you spend your life after you leave this planet, are the kinds of relationships that are discovered and developed while you are here on this earth. And so this morning what I want to do is I want to begin this series by giving you an overview of what the Bible teaches about relationships in general. I'm going to set the context this morning. I'm going to talk about the importance and the nature of relationships. And I'm entitling this morning's message, Can't We All Get Along? Anybody here ever hear your mama say that? Can't we all get along? Raise your hand. You ever had heard that? So I was raised in a family of three really loud boys. If you're here this morning and you're new to Abilene and you're used to a really quiet, calm pastor, I'm not that. I was raised in a very loud, verbose, boisterous, argumentative, combative family. And by the way, let me just move over here for a second. I flew this past week, had a great week, by the way. Thank you for praying for me. And I preached Tuesday morning at chapel at Anderson University, had a great time there. And then Josh put me on a plane, pointed it toward Fort Worth, flew out to Fort Worth, passed my defense for my PhD with distinction, whatever that means. I think it sounds good, all right? And I hope it is. And so, when I flew back out there, I went to the hotel that I stay when I go out there, the Hampton Inn there. And when I walked in, the lady behind the desk called me by my first name. Nobody uses my first name. My first name is Donald. And all of us Whitt boys, we go by our middle names. And so, but she hauled out, "Oh, Mr. Donald, you're back." And yeah, I'm back. And I said, but now this is going to be like the last time that I'm out here. The next time I'm back, I'm with my family. And I come back around the counter and I get a couple of Cokes to go upstairs. And I told her, I said, now, I'm bringing my family back. So if you're new to Abilene, we have 4 children, 15 down to 9. And I'm looking at this nice young lady who remembers my name and is glad that I'm there. And I'm warning her. I said, now, when we come back, my whole family's coming with me, and my kids are loud. My kids are loud, and I'm just giving her a warning. And so my kids get it honest because I was raised in that kind of a family. And so whenever we would get together for Christmas and Thanksgiving and New Year's, and you would put us 3 boys together, I mean, you could hear us down the street. I mean, it was just loud. And we would get into arguments and fusses and fights and over football. Not going to talk about that this morning. Over football. And all these other sorts of things, and hunting trips and that kind of thing. And my mom would finally have had enough, and my mom would say, can't we just all get along? And so that's what we're doing this morning. We're setting the stage and giving the overview. And then over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to get a lot more specific. We're going to talk about what do you do with a diva. We're going to talk about what do you do when you're nose to nose but not eye to eye. How do you forgive and forget? It's going to be really perhaps one of the most practical and important series of studies that I've shared with you in my 10 years as your pastor, because you see, the law of relationships says that every person is only 4 people away from every other person on the planet. That's why I believe that John Donne was right when he wrote that no man is an island unto himself. Although I did hear a study on Fox and Friends, so you know that it's true, but on Fox and Friends they had a study that said that the majority of Americans would rather be stranded on a desert island with their favorite pet than with another person. Don't raise your hands. I don't have time for the counseling sessions, okay? You know why that is? We no longer value relationships with other people. And as a result, we are isolated and insulated, and we are missing out on one of the most needed elements in our lives, and that is real, lasting, healthy, growing relationships. And so again, this morning what I want to do is I want to begin to help you discover and develop lasting relationships through this series. And so you're there in Philippians chapter 2, or you should be by now, beginning in verse 1. Would you please stand, and let's read these 2 passages together this morning. Philippians 2, of course, one of the greatest chapters in all of the Bible, and it teaches one of the greatest lessons on how to discover and develop lasting relationships that you'll ever learn. Philippians 2 verse 1, Paul says, therefore, if there is any consolation in Christ, if any comfort of love, if any fellowship of the Spirit, if any affection and mercy, fulfill my joy by being like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. So that's what Paul wrote. It was an early Christian hymn, an early church hymn. They sang that on the Lord's Day. That's what Paul wrote. But then look at what Solomon writes over in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, beginning of verse 9. Solomon writes, 2 are better than 1 because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, one will lift up his companion. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to help him up. Again, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one be warm alone? Though one may be overpowered by another, 2 can withstand him, and a 3-fold cord is not quickly broken. So thank you. You may be seated. That's the scripture, by the way. That's the scripture. Now let me share you real quickly this morning 3 little simple lessons that will help you to live with others and not by yourself. In other words, as you're looking forward to Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's, how can you get together and still get along, all right? So number 1, if you're taking notes this morning, and let me encourage you to do that. Number 1, write down this right here. Realize the importance of relationships. Just jot that down there somewhere. Realize the importance of relationships. So when I was growing up, I'm a child of the 80s. I was raised basically in the 80s, graduated high school in 91, the best music genre year ever. And so the 80s. And there was a TV show that I used to watch when I would come home from school. See if you remember it, called Grizzly Adams. How many of y'all remember Grizzly Adams? Raise your hand. So I watched Grizzly Adams, and I want to be Grizzly Adams. Not built like Grizzly Adams, but I want to become Grizzly Adams. And so I would read books on how to start a fire with a flint and steel, and how to make bows and arrows, and how to make knives, and how to make traps to catch squirrels and rabbits and all those sorts of things. And I would come home from school, jump off the bus, throw my bag in the carport, and run to the woods behind my house where I had built forts and traps, and I'd make fires out there. Don't do that, kids. Don't do that. I about burned up half of Mr. Jenkins' his back field there one day because I thought water was in the squeeze, and it was kerosene. Big deal. And so, but I would get back there and build forts, and I want to be a mountain man. I want to be a mountain man because when our nation was young, when it was just getting started, the mountain man, our buzzwords were individualism and self-reliance, and so as a result of that, the mountain man with his flintlock rifle and his double-sided axe, he was basically a national hero. And if you'll remember from your history studies back in those days, the government would give away a quarter section of land to anybody who would be willing to homestead it, and in order to promote settlement out west. And so what would happen is folks would leave the cramped and crowded cities and villages of the east, and they would migrate out west to their little quarter section of land. And when they would get out there, the very first thing that they had to do is they had to build a little sod hut, because you had to put something on it, all right? And so they would put this little sod hut, and where they would put it was in the smack dab center of that quarter section of land, because they come from crowded cities, and they want to be able to get out there and walk out on their front porch and look around, and everything they saw in every direction belonged to them. Anybody here understand that? So yeah, and but what they would discover is that's not good. Being isolated all out there by yourself in the middle of nowhere, that's not really good at all. And you can tell that it wasn't good for them because if you watch and look at the pictures that the photographers that were sent out west to record all this mass migration, when you look at the pictures that they would take of the men and the women and the children, you would have these wild-looking men and these weird-looking women and all these haunted children standing in front of those sod huts, because it's not good to be out there all by yourself. And so what they discovered then is that instead of moving into the middle of that quarter section, they would go down to the corner and build a house there. And then their three other neighbors would come and build their houses on the other three corners. And so 4 families living together, sharing life and death, joy and sorrow, abundance and want, they had a whole lot better chance of making it. Now, I understand now, out in West Columbia County, where I live, I couldn't really make this statement, so maybe, I don't know if I can say it here or not. Maybe you're here this morning, and the idea of moving out near the lake on 100 acres, that is your dream. I'm looking around the room. Is that your dream? I mean, you want to move out there where you can walk out in the front yard in your underwear and nobody cares. Anybody like that? Can I see your hands? Yeah, I get it. So I get it. You don't agree with this idea, but you're kind of like John Wayne. Relationships are for sissies, and all a man needs is his horse. Okay, I get it. I get it. You're happy spending life time by yourself. You're happy living your life with your family in the safety and security of your own home. You don't like getting caught up in all the drama, and you really don't like all the emotions and the high school stuff that comes from relationships sometimes. I had a guy tell me years ago, he said, "Pastor, I have enough problems with the people that I have to spend time with. I don't want to add any more problems by spending time with people that I don't have to spend time with." Anybody like that here this morning? Yeah. That's fine. But what you need to know is that means that you're going to live a life, if you're not careful, that's very, very lonely, and you're never going to become everything that God created you to be by doing that. Go back to what Solomon said in Ecclesiastes. If you're still there, just look at it. Why did Solomon say that relationships are so important? Or to put it another way, why are 2 better than 1? Solomon tells us there in Ecclesiastes, he says, because through working together, they have a good return for their labor. That's verse 9. Because through supporting each other, they lift each other up. That's verse 10. Because through encouraging one another, they can face dangerous times. That's verse 11. Because through strengthening each other, they can resist attacks. That's verse 12. I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty good to me, all right? They make more, they accomplish more, they can go further, they can face dangerous times, they can resist attacks. That's pretty good, especially when you consider the flip side. So the question this morning is, so then why do so many people live lives of isolation? Well, I got to thinking about that this past week as I was traveling back, and I think that there are at least 5 reasons. There might be more, but there are about 5 reasons. Number 1, unfamiliar surprises. I mean, something happens you didn't expect, and all of a sudden you are left alone. Hey, by the way, folks, that can happen to any one of us. Something like that, something you do not expect can happen, and all of a sudden you are alone. Number two is unwanted fears. Unwanted fears. And I know kind of what that feels like yesterday after that game, sitting in the middle of all that sea of red. I get it. Unpleasant adversities, unfair accusations, unexpected resistance. I had a lady tell me one time, she said, Pastor, relationships would be great if it weren't for people. What you don't realize is that pastors have that joke too, right? And you get a pastor on a bad Monday after he's had a bad Sunday. Somebody's chewed on him, been ugly to him or whatever, and a pastor will make a statement like this right here, pastoring would be great if it weren't for people. There's a problem with that. Without people, no need to pastor, right? And so relationships would be great if it weren't for people, but without people, you're not going to have relationships. Listen, God is a relational God, and He created relationships for you, and even more than that, He created you for relationships. And you will never be all that God created you to be and wants you to be and enjoy all that God has for you until you realize the importance of relationships. Hey, guys, look right here, especially the men. Don't miss this verse. Solomon writes this over in Proverbs, and he says in Proverbs 27, verse 17, as iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. Men, we need relationships too. And so that's the very first thing that we learn. Here's the second lesson. Number two, understand the nature of relationships. You know why I think that more people don't enter into and enjoy deep, healthy, growing relationships? First, I think it's because so few of us have seen them modeled for us. So few of us have seen healthy, growing relationships modeled well for us. I was raised again in the 80s. I was raised in the day where if you fall and you cut your knee, your mom or dad looks at you and says, spit on it, put dirt on it, get up and go. I was raised in the generation where they said, boys don't cry. And so we never really saw healthy, lasting, growing relationships modeled very well for us. And secondly, as a result of that, we really don't know what they are. And so again, this past week, I wanted to kind of help you to understand and help me to understand what are healthy, lasting, growing relationships? How can you define them? And so I want to give you a definition. And so I went and asked Webster, and here's what Webster says. Here's how Webster defines relationships. One, the state of being related or interrelated. Study the relationship between the variables. Two, the relation connecting or binding participants in a relationship as A, kinship, B, a specific instance or type of kinship. 3A, a state of affairs existing between those having relations or dealings, had a good relationship with his family. B, a romantic or passionate attachment. Let me ask you a question. How many of you all understand what he just said? Will you raise your hand? Yeah, me neither. I didn't understand a thing he said. And I think that one of the reasons why it's so hard to understand the nature of relationships is because you can't even find a really good definition for it. But even though it may not be easy to define, it is easy to know it when you see it. And so we see examples of relationships every single day. You have marital relationships between husbands and wives. You have parental relationships between parents and child. You have family relationships. The holidays are going to give you plenty of examples of family relationships. And so you're going to get together like my family probably. And you're going to get together again in a small little kitchen, small little dining room, small little living room. And you're going to be together with people that you never really see any other times of the year. And every time the family gets together, there's some crazy uncle. How many of you all have a crazy uncle in your family? Can I see your hands? You have a crazy uncle in your family? Let me see your hands. All right, if you couldn't raise your hand, you're probably him. How many of y'all have a crazy aunt in your family? Can I see your hands? Again, same thing. If you can't raise your hand, you're probably her. And so we have these relationships, marital, with husband and wife. You have parental, parent and child. And by the way, you got to be really careful not to mix those first two up. Did you know that? Little 8-year-old boy went to his girlfriend, and he asked her to marry him. And she said, I can't marry you. He said, why can't you marry me? She said, we got to be related. He said, what? He said, shit, everybody knows that. In order to be married, you got to be related. He said, why do you say that? He said, well, because my mama and daddy are related, and they're married. And then my grandmama and granddaddy, of course, they're related and they're married. And so you got to be related in order to be married. Of course, that only holds true in about 47 out of the 50 states. You can't count West Virginia, Kentucky, or Tennessee in those numbers, all right? Okay? So you have marital relationships and parental relationships. You have family relationships. You have business associates and church relationships and friend relationships. But here's the problem. Here's the problem. There are basically only about 4 levels of relationships, and the vast majority of the relationships in our lives only reach to what would be considered a surface or structured level of relationship, and they never really reach down there to what is considered to be the deeper and more meaningful levels of secure and solid relationships. That's one of the reasons why I love the Bible so much, because in the pages of this book, we are given examples of virtually every kind of relationship that we either enjoy or endure. For example, you have an example, an illustration of the perfect relationship. That's what you find there in the Trinity. By the way, you will never know this kind of relationship this side of heaven. I know we have some newlyweds in our church, and there was a couple of them out at West, and I was looking at them, and newlyweds, that they get married, and they think, oh, this is the perfect kind of relationships. Just wait till the bird seed and the rice falls out of your ear, and then you're going to realize, no, it's not a perfect relationship. So you have perfect relationships, you have broken relationships, God and man, you have loving relationships, you have the example of Jacob and Rachel, you got strained relationships of Abraham and Lot, you got restored relationships again of God and man. And so the very first lesson we have to learn is that to realize the importance of relationships, number 2, understand the nature of relationships, and then lastly, number 3, begin the development of relationships. So I've shown you the why and the what. Let me give you the how. How do you begin or renew a lasting relationship? And this really goes for parental, marital, spiritual relationships. If you're taking notes this morning, make sure you get this down. If you're not taking notes, you need to write this down. Dr. Rogers always told us, preacher boys, he said the weakest ink is better than the best memory. So write this down. You're going to need this. If you don't need it today, you're going to need it tomorrow. If you don't need it tomorrow, there's going to come a day in your life where you or somebody in your family, one of your relationships are going to need this, okay? So number 1, how do you make or how do you restore lasting relationships? Number 1, you got to make a commitment. It all starts with commitment. So we had Discover Abilene yesterday. It's one of the larger groups that we've had in a while coming out of COVID, and especially with all the sickness still running around. And in Discover Abilene, we talk about our covenants, membership covenant, ministry covenant, all those sorts of things. And then we make this statement. Why do we have these covenants? And the reason why is because we become what we're committed to. We become what we're committed to. So if you were to go ask my boys, what are you? Well, my boys just finished all summer practicing football, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, praying, a lot of times Friday nights, then playing football on Saturday. And my boys, I mean, they are committed to, I mean, they play for the Harlem. No, I'm not saying it. And just not going to say it. And so, but they're committed to that, and as a result of that, that's what they are. Jack now's moved over to playing for the Harlem Middle School. Not going to say it. And he plays basketball there. And so you're committed, you're practicing, you're serving. Jack comes in and says, I feel like I want to throw up. You know, that's what you get when you're running for basketball. You become what you're committed to. Laura Kate, cross country. She runs and runs and runs. 20 miles is a fun run for her on Saturday morning. Nothing fun about that. If you ever see me running, there is something really big, mean, and ugly behind me, and I'm out of ammunition. But we become what we're committed to. Make a commitment. Number 2, give your time. It takes time in order to have relationships, any kind of relationship. I've seen people who posted, especially coming out of COVID, didn't see this as much before COVID, but you see it posted online a lot, and you'll have somebody, and they think that they're being really smart, but they'll post something like this: you don't have to go to church to be a Christian. And it's their way of kind of making themselves feel better for them not going to church. And so they'll go, you don't have to go to church to be a Christian. You know what I would say to you? You're absolutely right. And in the same breath, I'd also say, you don't have to go home to be married. But if you don't go home, you're not going to have much of a relationship, right? And so you make a commitment, and then you spend time, you give time. And then number 3, you're be willing to sacrifice. So that's what makes relationships. You give and you take. And if you're always taking and never giving, then they're sacrificing, you're never sacrificing. Something's not healthy about that. You're going to be happy, they're not going to be happy, and that relationship's not going to last very long at all. Be willing to sacrifice. Learn to share. Learn to share. So again, 4 children in the Whitt family, 15 down to 9. One of the things I never had to teach my children, how to say, mine. Not one time. Not one time did I say, now here's how you do it. Hold your hands out and go, mine. No, they come out of the womb knowing how to do that. Mine. And so what you got to do is you grow up, because if you stay a baby, you're going to do that. But if you grow up and begin to mature, then you're making commitments, you're investing time, and you're learning to share, you're sacrificing. Next, be an encouragement. Be an encouragement. Learn to write a letter, learn to make a phone call. Give encouragement. I've been traveling a lot this week, and I came in, and my wife looked at me last night, Kim said, she said, did you notice I'd done a lot of laundry? Hey, guys, look right here. Let me help you. If your wife ever asks you the question, could you tell that I did a lot of laundry? Whether you did or not, the answer is always yes. The Lord will forgive you. She won't. Okay? And she said, I washed all your clothes, got all your underwear, you can put them up yourself. Thank you. Thank you. Be an encouragement. Write that letter, make that phone call. Somebody takes you somewhere special, look them in the eye, shake their hand, and say, thank you. Be an encouragement. Next, build trust. Build trust. You ever had somebody tell you, hey, I'm going to come to your house, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do this for you. And then you get all excited and say, oh, they're going to come and help, and then they don't show up. And that first time you're going to go, you know what, something must have happened, something came up, and I don't know what. And then they're going to say, hey, I'm going to come and I'm going to do this for you, I'm going to come to your house, I'm going to do this. And then they don't show up. About the second or third time that somebody tells you they're going to do something and they don't do it, what do? You don't trust them no more, right? Because then they're going to say, hey, I'm going to come and I'm going to do this. And you look at your kids and say, no, they're not. No, they're not. They say that. So you build trust by keeping confidence. Somebody says, hey, don't tell anybody this, don't tell anybody. You build trust. Takes a long time to build trust, takes about that to destroy it. Make sure you're building trust. And then lastly, as a result of all this, experience a meaningful relationship, because if you make a commitment, give your time, be willing to sacrifice, learn to share, be an encouragement, and build trust, guess what? You're going to be way down the road to building a healthy, growing, lasting relationship. Let me wrap it up this way. Christianity is a relationship. It's not a religion. I had a guy tell me one time, he said, well, you Christians, your religion. We don't have a religion. A religion is a checklist of do's and don'ts. We don't spell Christianity D-O-do or D-O-N-T, don't. We spell Christianity, we spell this relationship D-O-N-E, done. Because everything that has to be done for us has been done for us by Jesus. And so what we do is we don't join a religion, we enter into a relationship with the one who loved us and gave his life for us. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. Christianity is not a religion. Christianity is a relationship with the God of the universe through his Son, Jesus Christ. And if you're here this morning and you've never gotten in on this, if you've never begun that relationship with Jesus, what good excuse could you give today for not doing that right now? In just a minute, I'm going to ask you to do a couple of things. To realize that you're a sinner, because we all are. To repent of your sin, because that's what you got to do. And then lastly, to receive Jesus into your heart, to begin that relationship. I'll tell you something else. Not only is Christianity a relationship between you and your Heavenly Father, church is a relationship with your brothers and sisters. And if you're here this morning and you claim to be a Christian and you don't have a church home, that doesn't make any sense to me. Because you You claim to have a relationship with the Father. You've got all these brothers and sisters, but who are you part of? You've been coming for months or years. You never joined the church, become part of the Abilene family. What good? Why won't you do that today? You ought to do that today.